We are live. How is everyone doing this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever we are in this world today?
Great.
We're great.
I'm so happy to be here with this group. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm very grateful that all of you have decided to join. We have guests that are trickling in right now, so I'll wait maybe one more minute before we do our formal introductions. But as the formal introductions will take place, I again want to say how grateful I am for you all to make this space today to have a really necessary open dialogue.
It's so important.
Thank you.
It really is. I mean, given the impact that hospitality and tourism has on our local communities, our local economic drivers, it's really important that they understand that the world is watching.
That's right.
And so how do we now take a step back and make sure that we are providing not only the services that are required in our own communities, but also to our visitors, because they have such an outside impact on our economy.
And we want to be part of the solution to move forward.
And that, exactly. We do. And that's why we're having this conversation today. So welcome everyone who have decided to join us today. This topic is what's next going forward, addressing the intersectionality of law enforcement, hospitality, and diversity. It's a webinar sponsored by Project Positive Planet, and it's a co-collaboration between Weld World TV, Caribbean We, and Papilia. I am more than excited today to have Captain LaPonda Fitchpatrick, CEO of LaPonda J. Fitchpatrick, The Real World Consulting, Gregg Ward, founder and executive director for the Center for Respectful Leadership. I'm Sophia Heider-Hawk, founder of Papilia, and we have Kim Diorsi, spa operations and marketing expert. Welcome everyone today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for having me.
More than happy. So I wanted to do everyone justice and to have us introduce ourselves. So I'll go first, we'll do Kim and then LaPonda and Greg. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Sophia Heider-Hawk and I am the founder of Papilia, a company that designs and facilitates diversity and social inclusion strategy, training, and workshops for travel organizations. Kim?
My name is Kim Diorsi. I've been in the spa and wellness industry for the past 30 years. I'm the founder of a wellness company called Wellness That Works. And I organically met Greg during the coronavirus through a mutual friend through the COVID aid. And we had an open conversation and dialogue of how he could be part of our platform for Mindful Leaders Mondays. But here we are on a Wednesday. And with an important discussion, an important topic, one that I'm proud to be a part of. And so thank you. And then he introduced us to LaPonda, and I couldn't be prouder of what we have to come for the next hour. So welcome.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kim. LaPonda, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is LaPonda Fitchpatrick, and I am a organizational development and law enforcement consultant. And those two generally mesh very well together. I spent over 31 years as a police officer with the Los Angeles World Airport Police, or LAX, as most of us know, for over 31 years, retiring there as a captain.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg.
Well, I've lived a circuitous life, but essentially many, many years ago, I started training New York City police officers in the art and science of de-escalation techniques. We were using live professional theater at that time to do that training. And since then, I've worked in many different organizations delivering diversity and inclusion training using live theater. And recently, my team and I founded what we call the Center for Respectful Leadership. And that is the work we are doing and I plan to do until the day I die.
And if I might, there's one other connection here as we're talking about how we're connected. Greg was my first mentor in diversity and inclusion. And so we have been on this journey together for quite some time. So I just want to, I have to give props where they belong. So he was my first mentor, and a phenomenal young man that taught me a lot.
Thank you, LaPonda. You taught me a lot too.
Oh,
This is such a positive space. I'm very excited, and I want to dive right into questions because there's a lot that we have to cover, and I know this conversation could go on for weeks, days, months, years. So LaPonda, I would love to ask you, what does law enforcement have to do with hospitality and tourism?
Well, everything. And in particular, everything, literally. Oftentimes, a law enforcement officer outside of customs, if you're international, or just if you're coming from one city to the next, law enforcement is really your first experience with government when you're coming into the local community. So we are that representative. So how we react, how we speak to people, how we answer questions, how we dress, all of that is going to make their first impression. Also, unfortunately, hospitality is an area where sometimes you have criminals that prey on tourists. They're unfamiliar with the area. They may go with a driver that's not licensed. They may lose their bags through distraction. So law enforcement is a huge part of hospitality. And then the second thing is they're going to provide a lot of instruction. Where do people go? How do I get here? People are taught from early age, if you have a question, ask a law enforcement officer. But more so than that, it also too depends on where that person is coming from, what their law enforcement posture was from the country they are. So are they friendly? Are they authoritarian? And so these officers need to understand that when they're interacting in the hospitality industry. Let's face it, hospitality brings in what, $8 trillion in the global economy. We want to make sure that that economic stream, as well as the sharing of information and learning about new people and new things, is in a safe environment. So yeah, we are a part of your hospitality, and a lot of times we're an afterthought, but I think we need to be right there with you.
And quite honestly, I just want to interject really fast is I travel quite a bit, and until we had that conversation, LaPonda, it was then that light bulb that I thought, you're right, because every single time I'm in and out of an airport, I'm always working through customs, and it is that first impression that you receive when you enter a country. So thank you for bringing that to my awareness.
Right.
LaPonda, do you
Yes.
know the reputation of the officers that are being assigned to the areas that are dense with hotels and tourism?
So a lot of times, and I can tell you this from my experience in training officers worldwide, right? So I provide their training on how to interact in the aviation environment as well as in a tourism environment. So a lot of times, and we have convinced cities don't do that. Sometimes they do put their problem, what we call their problem children, in these areas because they feel like they're going to have less contact. But that's not the right thing to do. I always encourage airports that either contract with or have their own police departments interview who's coming into your airport. Do they understand that the environment is different? Yes, it is a terrorist target. We know that. We've seen what happened from there. But the environment is also different. It is moving people from point A to point B. It is not necessarily chasing the bad guy down the alley. And sometimes it's really hard for officers to understand that, because more so than anywhere, they have to be what we call on their toes. That at one point you're a tourist guide. You have to accept that just as much as if you're investigating someone at close range that may be a criminal or a terrorist or something of that nature. So you really do need to know who's coming into your tourism. How often are you actually meeting with your tourism groups, the Chamber of Commerce? One of the things that I always did, I met with our Chamber of Commerce along what we call the corridor, where a lot of your hotels and services are right next to your airport. There was a group, what I used to always like to call, there are many Chamber of Commerce, but there was a group there, Gateway LA. I was at their meetings once a month saying, what do you need from us? How does this work? Because what we teach our law enforcement officers is the bad guy doesn't just come into the space. They have a hotel room, they're using rental car agencies. So all of these things and having these conversations and understanding what's to be expected is really important. And you know what? If an officer is not performing in the manner in which they should be, those hospitality, the hotel manager, people that are running restaurants should know that commanding officers by their first name. He or she should be on a first name basis, and they should be able to call up and say, this is not working for me, because it's too important.
That's a great point. Well, to piggyback on what you said, what is there specific training that has been offered to law enforcement who are working specifically within the travel hospitality industry? And if there isn't, what kind of training do you recommend take place?
So I can tell you for aviation,
Okay.
and aviation may encompass city police. That means a police that's working directly for a city, county, state, or a police department like ours at LAX that work for the airport. So I've been giving this training for more than 25 years, and it encompasses all manners of incidents or issues that can come up in the aviation environment. And one thing that we do require, it's kind of ironic, but in the state of California, there's an actual law that says that you have to train police officers working in the airport in an environment on, the rules and regulations, on the federal laws, and how to treat guests with courtesy and understanding. So we do have training in that area, but we need more training in the specific areas of hospitality, in and around hotels. They do have training for prostitution. That unfortunately is a part of tourism. People, that's where they know they can go to the hotels and get a foreigner or something of that nature. But specifically on how to really interact with tourists and put your best foot forward, it may be done individually, but collectively, no. I am not aware of a collective training.
Greg?
I was going to add, I've worked in hospitality, I've served hospitality, and there are many of the large global chains who will train their staff and managers in what's called cultural competency, because you have so many people coming from all over the world, of all religions, of all cultures, and if your staff isn't welcoming to them and courteous and respectful of them, well, by gosh, your property is going to suffer. And so what I think we're arguing for, I think you would agree with me, LaPonda, we also need to teach our police departments cultural competency. In large cities, you look at New York City, or you look at Los Angeles, these are the most diverse places in the world. And you can't have a police department that doesn't reflect that diversity, or at least have an understanding of how important that diversity is to the life of the city. That's something that I think we're calling for more and more and more. Cultural competency is something you in hospitality really need to embrace and work together with police departments to understand how it works.
Sure. And that's a part of the course that I teach, that there is a cultural competency part of it, because it really goes into, first of all, how people interact with each other, right? You know, just watching how people have their own personal space is a different issue in the United States as it is in other countries. Now, we know social distancing has made a huge change through this COVID-19 pandemic, but also how people respond to law enforcement. You know, I used to get officers that would complain because some cultures look down. And the officers say, well, they're not, what are they thinking? They're not respecting me. No, that is a sign of respect. That if you look someone straight in the eye, that is disrespectful. So teaching that cultural competency first within their own cities, as Gregg stated, you know, because they're so diverse, but then understanding who's coming into your city. You know, it's easy for people that have large amusement parks like Disney World or Orlando or Disneyland. You know, they do receive some training in this area. Right? But then they also rely on the large security apparatus that these organizations have. But you really do need to understand it's about talking to people. It's about talking to people and understanding that every time you open this, you are representing your city. You're representing the company. You're representing the hotel that they're staying at. And so I think that's really, really important in having them understand. And then understanding, and this is what I do. I said, here's our budget. And this is our budget. And this is how much of our budget comes from rents and royalties, comes from the rental car places that are paying to bring their vehicles into the airport. This is what comes from ticket prices. This is what comes from food. This is your money. This is your training. This is your salary. This is your uniforms. If this is not your thing, we get it. But this is paying your salary. And so you have to protect that as well. So there's this, I want to do as well as I can for you because I want you to continue to pay rents and royalties and taxes and things so I can exist. And so a lot of times we don't look at it from that standpoint because, and we'll get to you, Gregg, we don't look at it from that standpoint. We look at it as I'm the police and I don't have to answer to anyone. And that doesn't work. We've seen that. So yeah, go ahead, Gregg.
I was going to add, I've had the good fortune, I've lived in Europe for many years, and I've been to quite a few, I know many of your listeners are in the spa community, and I've been to lovely spas, and I love how the staff at the spa are international. They're from all over the world, and there is an expected standard of behavior towards the spa guests, which is in the best places, gold star, platinum, you know, just absolutely the customer service, the understanding, the cultural competency is almost like it's built into the experience of being at that spa. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could marry that with policing? If police officers had that much understanding of their role in hospitality, of their role in the community. Sadly, we have some challenges there with what we've been talking about earlier and in other conversations around what we called the militarization of the police. And I wonder if that's, I think you were going to ask us about that and some of the challenges there.
Right. We're going to do that later.
Okay.
Yeah, later on, definitely to tackle that. And I think also one more point to what you're saying, LaPonda, is when you speak, that's one form of communication, but the body language is so powerful, and that body language is also so different in different cultures. And I think that also is something that is not addressed enough.
It's not, and we have to understand that we are more so than any time in our history so global. I mean, imagine that, yes, we will come out of this pandemic. We know that we will, this is one of those situations that we must solve. It's not we can solve or should be solved, but we really do have to solve it. And so we are a global society. I often talk to my 11-year-old granddaughter, and I say, you may not work in the United States. You may choose to work anywhere in the world. You can go anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. You can be in Denver at at the beginning of a 24-hour shift and be in Shanghai the next day. I mean, literally. And so we are a global society, even here virtually. We are a global society. And so when we speak, when we talk, I often tell officers that you are representing it's the way that it operates. You're representing your city, your department, your community. You're representing yourself. You're representing if you are responding to a hospitality situation, a hotel, a restaurant, you are even representing them. And so how you need to learn how to function in those different environments. We have so focused on crime reduction that we have forgotten that there are other ways to address issues. And I think this is going to come up under Gregg, but there are other ways to address issues that are not crime related. Sometimes a police officer's job is public relations. Mm-hmm. Your job, sometimes it's public relations. Sometimes it's briefly, you may be a mental health practitioner. I mean, you're a question and answer. Please, if someone comes and asks you a question, if you don't know the answer, you need to find the answer. You never tell them, I don't know. You tell them, excuse me, wait a minute, let me see if I can find the answer for you.
And that's training 101 in the spa industry.
Exactly.
In the hospitality.
But that doesn't happen in law enforcement. Hey, I don't know. And they'll keep on talking to their partner or they'll walk away. And that's the number one thing. And so what is that person thinking when that officer walks away? I can tell you what they're thinking. And it's not nice and it's not nice. But it's because of the way they were treated. See, Gregg has his company, his Center for Respectful Leadership. But leadership is at all levels of an organization. It is in every contact that you make. And I think that's what we've forgotten, and that's what law enforcement has forgotten, is that respect for the situation you find that person in. Just really quick, when law enforcement is called into a hospitality situation, that may be that person's worst day. They've planned this vacation for 5 years. And someone may have taken their purse, or they've lost their money, or maybe they've bought a service that was fake. You're encountering these people on their worst day. Mm-hmm. Understand that when you're going in, and it may seem minor to you, but it's major to them. Mm-hmm. And so your attitude and how you come across, and as Sophia said, what is your attitude? Are you open? Or are you like this? Do you have your hand on the butt of your gun? Are you treating that person like a suspect instead of the reporting party? These are all things that have to be reinforced. Officers learn these in the academy. They know this, but there's a saying by, I think his name is Samuel Williams, and he was an author, an English author. And he often says that it's more important to be reminded than to be instructed.
That's a good point, LaPonda. Very good point. And we're going to go to the next question. Have hospitality and travel industry groups in cities held conversations with local law agencies and enforcements about issues associated with safety? And how are they being addressed?
Most of them do.
Okay.
Most of them do come in to speak at chambers and speak at the local, hotel managers group. A lot of times, the Chamber of Commerce is driving this, or like I said, like in my situation, Gateway LA, that actually drove the conversations. So we do. I think, though, is that we wait for that once a month or once a quarter. And this needs to happen more often. They need to be having conversations once or twice a week. Having what we, in the United States, and in particular Los Angeles, we call them senior lead officers or community liaison officers. And they could be for the school district, they could be for a community, a block, but they also could be for the community, the hospitality community. Demand that. There's nothing wrong with you going to your local police and saying, you know what, we would really like to deal with this a little bit further. So I would like, can't we have someone that's assigned to us that we can always call if we have a question, so we don't keep getting random people? So they do that, but I think it needs to happen a lot more often. They do. I know.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say to that point. Then what are some ways that representatives in the hospitality and tourism industries can work together with law enforcement through a D&I lens?
Wow. So we know now that there are so many that we have. There's the D&I lens that they can work through is understanding that, first of all, everyone is different. That everyone comes into the space with so many different dimensions of diversity, right? It's not just what their skin looks like. It's not what you think they are. It's actually who they are. And by having a conversation with them and understanding where they're coming from, that's the most important thing here. So first of all, we have to teach our police officers that everyone is different. That although they may appear to be similar, they're different. Even if you had engaged with this similar person the day before, and maybe that engagement didn't go as well as you would like, that doesn't mean that today's engagement is going to be different. The other thing, when we talk about inclusion, police officers, and I believe that a lot of it is because of this, we are living in what I call a microwave society. We want things to happen quick. We are no longer patient. And we see that in police officers today. That's one of our biggest issues. Be a little more patient, especially when you're dealing with situations that allow you to do so. Now, there's some, hey, if you're going to, you have to arrest someone, you want to do that fairly quickly, get them out of the public eye. We understand that. But be patient and listen. Listen more than we speak, and you will get a lot more information, and you will understand. The other issue is not being frustrated.
A true leader is one that listens.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other issue is, if you're having a difficulty, and we tell my police all the time, if someone is not speaking clear English, especially in the United States or in any country, if they're not speaking your language clearly, they know two languages. They're having to transfer what you're saying through their brain to their language, and then have it come out the other side, figure out how to respond in their language, put it back into your language and out. That's a very bright and intelligent person. Don't make the assumption because their English is broken or unclear that they are not intelligent. Actually, if you don't speak two languages, they're ahead of you. And when we tell officers that, and their eyes get this big, and they go, I never thought about it that way. So it takes patience too. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, the inclusion part is the patience part. Being willing to listen, being willing to hear what they're trying to say, and then helping them resolve their issue.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and it really helps to think about everything that you've said through that lens, and I can't thank you enough for your insights.
And there's one other area, and that is equity. And that is really coming into play. And that is meeting people where they are. If someone is disabled, assisting them in accomplishing that same goal, but with a help. So they can't go down, and it's simple. They can't go down the escalator. Show them where the nearest elevator is. When you're making your emergency plans, Do you have a space where if you have to evacuate the building, that someone that may be in a wheelchair can go to get assistance? If you have a power outage or anything of that nature. So find people where they are and look at things not only from a diversity lens or an inclusion lens, but also with equity. And equity is find an interpreter if you're running across someone that may not speak the language. Equity is helping someone. Instead of pointing at the location, take 2 steps and walk them to that location. And that's in any interaction, whether it's in the hospitality industry or whether it's back in the police officers' communities that they serve. We have to start meeting people where they are. And we cannot overlay our beliefs and how we do things on how others do. There's no such thing as a law enforcement officer saying, well, this is how we do things when we encounter. It's individual. And so that has to be there too.
That's a very good point. And LaPonda, as you brought this up, as you mentioned all of this, I also think in a general sense, when we say diversity inclusion, I think people think about culture, they think about race, they think about gender, but accessibility is something that is not always, it's not really in the forefront. And that is something that is should be brought to the forefront. So thank you for bringing that up.
It really is. And I know internationally they have different standards for what accessibility is. But I can tell you, and we think about what that accessibility means. And that's not just what you can see. That's also cognitive accessibility. Correct. And we know that based on statistics that by 2030, upwards of 25% of the world will have an identifiable disability. And whether it's cognitive, whether it's physical, those have to be accommodated. And I think that that's a great starting point for accommodating everyone as an individual and what they need. And imagine who can afford to say, I don't need 25% of my profit.
No one.
No one. And so when you think about spa services, when you think about explorer tourism, where you're going on a safari or a bike ride, or some of those things that I'm so looking forward to. I'm looking forward to my bike ride through the south of France. That is my ultimate bucket list. But what if I'm a little disabled? What if I have a cognitive disability? How are you going to accommodate me while you're accommodating everyone else? Because you can't afford to lose 25% of your customers. You'd be out of business.
True. Well, I'd love, I'm excited about this conversation. We could, like I said, talk about this.
We've been talking all morning.
I know we have. Gregg, I would love to ask you, how did you become a D&I trainer?
It was something that hit me over the head and came out of the blue for me. As I mentioned, I'd done some work training police officers using theater in New York City. And eventually, what I and my colleagues started to realize is that our art, our performance techniques and our improvisational skills were very useful in addressing complicated and loaded topics like diversity. I think we can all agree that for many people, diversity, that even having a conversation about diversity makes them uncomfortable. And so what we found is by using professional theater, improvisational techniques, as well as performance, people were willing to suspend that fear and discomfort and get into the storytelling. So if you were to ask me, what is it you do? I'm a storyteller. I help people see the world and understand how wonderful this world is through stories. And I happen to depict those stories using actors and theater and improvisation and discussions and powerful, powerful discussions that are prompted by that work. And so one way or another, I've been doing that work, and I got tapped in the early 90s to develop a program using theater on diversity and inclusion in the corporate sector. And it exploded. My business grew from a pretty tiny little business into a very large business, literally overnight, within the matter of a year or two. And I've been very fortunate that we've been able to do this work all over the world with all sorts of different kinds of organizations, including government agencies, police departments, you name it. We've been really, really blessed because we bring something different to the conversation that most people have never seen before.
Okay, Gregg, what kind of training did you provide for the New York City or the New York Police Department? And what kind of training do you think would help the current situation? And more importantly, how can the training last? The effects of the training last?
Those are very good questions, and thank you. Essentially what I was doing back in the 80s with the police department was addressing their need for skills in how to handle what they call EDPs, emotionally disturbed persons. Very often, these are people in public in the homeless community, or people who are suicidal, people who are drug addicted and are in distress. And very often a beat cop will come upon them and really not have any skills to de-escalate them. And it was very much, back in the day, it was hit them over the head with a nightstick, throw the cuffs on them, and take them down to the station house and book them. That wasn't working. And there were some very, very infamous incidents involving the deaths of seriously emotionally disturbed people at the hands of police in police custody. And so what the department wanted to do was create a program that really helped officers learn some simple techniques of de-escalation. I would definitely argue that many of our police departments need that kind of training. We've become too used to the us versus them. I know of police officers who do not live in the communities in which they serve. They live far away. And then they come in and they armor up both with gear, and in their hearts, they armor up and go into the community, preparing to do battle in the community that they're supposed to be protecting and serving. So it is no surprise to me that encounters, which could end very peacefully if an officer knew the techniques of de-escalation and nuance and persuasion and influence. Instead, without those techniques, these encounters immediately go violent. They immediately become a question of who's got more power and control, and the officer is feeling disrespected and all that kind of stuff. And so this is why we have what we have to this day, is a lack of understanding that your job as a police officer is not just to fight crime and get the bad guys, but it's also to serve the community in which you work and hopefully live.
And bring it together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. And I'm sorry. And again, there's a question that's in the chat that I really want to answer. Really, and it is a question, should we redefine or reassess the qualifications required to be a police officer? In many ways, it's not the qualifications themselves, it's those who are doing the choosing. Police officers go through polygraph, they go through psychological testing, they go through a complete background. I can tell you that only about 8 to 10, it's even less now, but 5 to 10% of police officers that are hired out of the 100% of the candidates, only 5 to 10%. So it's very, very, very low, right? We hire them for personality, but a lot of times, those that should not be hired, like police officers that move from agency to agency because of bad behavior, they do slip into the cracks, because what happens is that the person that's choosing them, that officer may look like their son or their daughter, and they bypass
for them.
Exactly. And so they bypass. So how we choose police officers, as my last command, I was in charge of what I called hiring, unfortunately, termination and training. And so I did I reviewed the backgrounds of police officers. I made sure they had their psychological checks. I made sure that we talked to their parents and their friends and their neighbors. So so the majority of police officers actually do go through a very, very meticulous background. But it's when someone chooses someone that shouldn't be on that department, even when they know it, but they make the recommendation to the chief and the chief hires them, you can see those problems. And we'll talk a little bit about the issue with Tamir Rice in the United States. But as Gregg said, we don't hire them to shoot people into jail, to beat people into jail, and I don't know of any organization that's that's actually a democracy and not overly authoritarian, because we know we have hospitality issues. Locations that may be in an authoritative state, but in those where they really choose policing for what they are, they do. The qualifications are stringent. It's that when we don't follow them. And isn't that the issue? Isn't that the issue? Gregg has trained NYPD de-escalation techniques. They get in the academy, but they don't follow them.
There are some countries which require a bachelor's degree. Some countries require 2 years of police training before you even get out onto the street. And unfortunately in the US, and this was an issue when I was working with New York City Police Department, we had a program at John Jay College of Criminal Justice called the Police Cadet Program. We wanted the entire NYPD, every officer should at least have an associate's degree in criminal justice. To this day, I do not believe that is a requirement. All you need in many police departments is a high school diploma.
Or a GED.
You
don't
or
even have to have a high school diploma.
Yeah.
A GED.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely correct. What police agencies are doing now, which is good, is that they're giving bonuses for people that come in with an associate's degree or bachelor's degree. You start at a higher level on compensation. And then they're also encouraging police officers that are on the job to go out and get additional training, and you get a bonus for that. That was a big issue with the Los Angeles Police Department, where they have these bonuses that are scheduled to come into play July 1, where officers that have an AA degree or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in areas that are approved by the department, they get a significant bonus. It could be criminal justice, it could be sociology, anything that has you dealing with the people.
Part of the problem also, sorry, LaPonda, is that in the United States, our police agencies are not under any kind of federal or national system. My little city here, we have a little police department here, but they don't have the funding to give officers bonuses because they're going to go get an associate's or master's degree. That's just not possible. And that's true for many different police departments because they're all locally funded. There is no national oversight. And that is one thing that I think we're all tending to agree upon now. There needs to be some national policing standards. And we've talked about hospitality. I think what LaPonda is saying in a way is we're encouraging all police departments to connect and be part of the hospitality community, but there's no requirement to do that. If the leadership in the police department doesn't want to do it, well, it's not going to get done. And so maybe we have to find a way to incentivize police departments to reach out to the hospitality community more and more and more so that we work together rather than see each other as combatants on the other side.
Right.
Absolutely.
So true. And I'd like to thank Paula Spears for that question on the qualifications. An excellent question. And then in my high school, Jupiter High School, where I live in Jupiter, there is a program in high school for police and getting involved with the local authorities. So they're learning that in high school for criminal justice.
Those are,
Yeah.
and a lot of organizations have cadet programs. I know my agency has one. I don't know if NYPD has one, but a lot of agencies do have cadet programs where you come in at 13 years old and you come in and you work in the police station, you volunteer. They have had some problems in the past though, unfortunately, and they're trying, they've had some significant problems in the past. So those programs are really, really important. Santa Monica, in California, they have what's called the Police Athletic League or the PAL program.
Right.
I know that my nephews went through that program. That's where the police were in the park, and that they were so very, I mean, I know we're going a little bit off topic, but guess what? What happens when someone from a hospitality goes over to the park, goes over to the museum? They are going to have contact with law enforcement that are going to be keeping those areas safe. So all these things that we create for the community at large can also support their hospitality, because guess what? If in my perfect world, I would have never had a career, ever. This is a career that, although it was wonderful and I had a great career, and yes, I ran across police officers that were not at their best, and some of them that I did not understand how they even were hired, right? As I talked to you about that, and I think we see that the worldwide, right? But here in this space, in this microcosm of time, I wish we didn't have police. I do. I wish I did, but I'm also a realist. And I know that human beings are selfish and they would eat each other alive. There's a question that we'll get to when we finish with Gregg about defunding the police.
Right.
No, it's not defunding the police. It's called reallocating resources. The police have been asked to do so much.
So let's actually address that now. Let's address that now.
Okay.
So the question is, can you talk about defund the police specifically to how it worked in Camden, New Jersey?
I can talk a little bit about it, and maybe LaPonda, you can talk more. We have to understand that the word defund has already become heavily politicized. Yes. And it may work really well on a poster, and it may work really well in a chant, but many, many people, when they hear the words defund the police, it makes them very, very nervous. What they think people are saying is abolish the police, get rid of the police altogether. Now, there are a few people out there in this world who are calling for exactly that, but I am not. I don't think LaPonda is, and quite frankly, I don't know many people who have high levels of responsibility in policing, law enforcement, who are saying, yeah, that's a good idea. No. But what people are saying is that our priorities for funding are a bit out of whack, to say the least. If statistically, what we've seen since the Johnson administration is a significant uptick in funds that go to police departments, especially in major cities like Oakland and Chicago. Up to 40% of the general fund goes to the police department, and a tiny, tiny percentage goes to mental health, public health, crime safety and crime prevention. There are so many places, and addressing homelessness and hunger and poverty. It's a minuscule amount of the general fund that goes to all those other things. And a lot of the budget goes to the police department, which is also using some of that funds to militarize, to take advantage of a program that came out of the Pentagon, which essentially says the police departments may buy equipment and use tactical training techniques that are better suited for combat than they are for policing. But that program many police agencies have taken advantage of that program. So it's what we call the militarization of the police. So what the defunders are essentially, most of the people who say defund, what they're really saying is reduce funding for militarization of the police and increase funding for training of police officers and anti-bias and sensitivity, cultural sensitivity and awareness and racism and all that stuff that we need to talk about, and fund the programs that help reduce homelessness and poverty and root systemic causes for clashes in our communities. That's essentially what I think most of us are talking about when the word defund comes up. I prefer to use the word demilitarize, but I understand why others use the word defund. I wish it wasn't such a loaded word.
And I have to understand this current militarization of the police. It called the Urban Area Security Initiative grants, or the UASI grants. And so what they were allowing, the smallest police department that had 7 officers assigned to it was getting a Humvee and military grade equipment, and there were 7 of them. And so they became, in essence, was almost a mercenary a force, right? Because remember, what you look like, how you carry yourself is what your brain tells you you are. When we talk about defunding the police, again, like I started, I would love not to have police. Wouldn't that be utopia? And that all the money that we spend on police officers would be going to schools and going to hospitals and going to all of the areas that we know have an outside impact on law enforcement's response. But we know that that's unreal. So give you a perfect example. As Gregg said, it's easy to put some of society's ills on the police. They're there 24/7. You can call them easily, 911. You don't have to set up a new apparatus. So the homeless population, I'll give you a perfect example. The homeless, I mean, it's worldwide, it's global. And in the United States, it's untenable at this point. But what is a police officer supposed to do about a homeless person that may be urinating in front of one of your hospitality members? Do I?
That's happened to me several times.
Yes.
Yeah,
So here you go. So do I arrest that person for it used to be, and in some cases in some states and countries it's still against the law to urinate in public. Do I arrest that person? Now what I have to do is I have to take all their stuff, I have to categorize everything that they have, I have to book it into evidence. This one issue of this person urinating on the street is making officers, taking them out of the field for 4 hours. And then what happens is, so now, did the officer resolve the problem? No. The person's going to get out of jail. They're going to come back to that same place and they're going to urinate in that same place. So we spent thousands of dollars to deal with a homeless person that doesn't have a place to urinate. Right. So wouldn't it be easier if I said, hey, we're going to get you a place to urinate. We're going to get you a place to move your stuff and live. You look at what happened after COVID-19. How fast did we find homeless shelters? We turned old buildings. We turned hotels.
San Diego Convention Center. We turned the convention center into a giant homeless shelter. Exactly. Right here.
Right here. We turned schools that had been, because people aren't having as many children. So we turned abandoned schools into homeless shelters. You look at what Amazon, I think it's Amazon. Amazon is keeping a building that they owned, that they were getting ready to build in. They're keeping it as a homeless shelter. Yeah. So when you think about that, what happens when you have a drug addict? How much money is spent on police officers responding to a drug addict, an overdose? How much do the person overdose? We're looking at it from, well, maybe it's a crime. Well, let the ME tell us that, right? Let the ME tell us that. Do we really need to respond to people shooting up drugs, or does a mental health clinician or a drug addiction program need to respond to those?
By the way, we're now seeing agencies who are just in the last couple of weeks have said, you know what, we're going to stop sending cops to every call about a homeless person who's acting out. We're going to send a mental health professional instead. We're going to send a homeless advocate instead.
Excellent point, because I think it's mental health that we need to address.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you can't, a police officer is not equipped or trained to be an on-the-street mental health counselor. That's just so inappropriate for us to ask them to do that. And yet that is exactly what we've asked them to do, because we've defunded all of the other services and ramped up funding for the police. And that's a recipe for disaster. And here we are.
Yeah. And it made people comfortable. See, it's comfortable. Remember, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, right.
It made them very, very comfortable. And when you look at the cities and you look at, and this is all over the world. So I know this is a question, but you look at gentrification, you look at the building of convention centers, you look at the building of roadways and things of that nature. All of these come into play. But the police officer, let me tell you something, I was good at my job. I'll be the first to tell you, I was great at my job. Right now in Los Angeles, at LAX, we have police officers that are a part of a homeless task force, because we have people that are living permanently in our airports, and they're trying to find shelters, and they're trying to find places for people to go, and homeless. Well, the deal is we eliminated our mental health, right? Some, even if you have medical insurance, some of it doesn't have mental health, and a lot of these issues. And I can tell you, when police officers respond to hotel rooms, when they respond to restaurants, oftentimes the people that they're responding to are having a mental health crisis. That happens more often than not, more often than people would think that would happen. So yeah, so no, defunding the police is, no, you can't, because all people are not good people. But you do have to change the way they engage with the community, what they do for the community. Police officers, we want to resolve the problem, right? They're just as frustrated as all of you. They're so frustrated right now. They're frustrated with what their fellow police officers are doing that's wrong. They're frustrated with the politics. And so and I'll get right with you. And so responding to the hospitality industry, that frustration may play over as well. And I'm sorry, Sophie.
No, it's okay. I think all these points need to be said. I just want to make sure that we do a time check, because we have about 5 minutes left and a lot more to cover. I know, but I wanted to address 2 questions that are in our chat. One is, I'll read it. My own encounters with police officers just for mundane driving violations makes me feel like most of them have this bully type of personality. Do you feel that the police forces tend to hire people of by type of personality? Personality is not something you can change. Just like in hospitality, you have to find the right person that's naturally inclined to be kind to their guests. So if bullies want to hire bullies like themselves, that's in the culture. How realistic is it to change things after just some training here and there?
So, and we run across this all the time, right? So we try to hire for fit. They go through, it takes about 2 years to get hired on as a police officer. That's on the average. So it's not a quick process. You know, you're going through background checks. You're having an investigator go out to your home. But yes, you know, sometimes bullies do handle bullies. But here's the deal. And it's just like the bully on the schoolyard, right? They're not bullying when the teacher is there. They're doing it when the teacher turns their back. I'll give you a perfect example. We know, based on the reports that have come out, and I think the world knows about George Floyd. A supervisor did not show up to that scene for 48 minutes. And that's the biggest problem we have, is that we need more supervision. We know that at the end of a pursuit, at the end of a fight, you know, where the police officer is actually struggling with a suspect, that we know when the supervisor is on the scene, it is a negative encounter. Now, asking that it reduces the use of force, answering that question about getting stopped in for a vehicle violation. Unfortunately, that's one of the most dangerous things that a police officer can do. That just, the statistics bear it out. There are two of the most dangerous things that police officers encounter. One is a vehicle stop, and two is a domestic violence call.
Yep.
And unfortunately, we respond to domestic violence calls in hotels and restaurants, and we had to close down LAX because people were having a domestic dispute, and they threw stuff out the window, and we thought it was something, a dangerous item. So yeah, so those are dangerous situations, and so that's why I don't think that what we need to do, especially for vehicle stops, is we need, as a part of your getting your driver's license, you should be trained in how to respond to a police officer when they're doing a vehicle stop. You should be trained. Hey, when you encounter a police officer, turn the vehicle off, roll down your window, turn off the radio, put your hands on the steering wheel. We don't train that. So see, the training goes both ways. Right? It goes both ways. This is something that the hospitality industry can train too. Hey, by the way, when you're renting a car, just understand policing in America, because some people, they don't have guns, right? In London, unless you're a part of the special unit. So in United States, this is how you do that. So yeah.
Before you respond, I want to do a quick time check. It's almost 1 o'clock, and perhaps we can extend this conversation. I want to respect people's time till about 1:05. But I wanted to do that time check because this is a necessary conversation. Please go ahead, Gregg.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that LaPonda and I have talked about in the past is that if you are a member if you're a person of color and you've been repeatedly stopped by the police and you've done your best to be respectful, and yet something still happens, and the data is out there that unfortunately people of color are cited and arrested at multiple times more than white folks. And so it sometimes annoys people of color when we say, well, just comply and everything will work out. Well, Philando Castile complied and it didn't work out. It worked out really badly for him. And there are many people in the community who are people of color and in community, underserved communities, who feel the police are not there to help, but rather to occupy and punish. And so it can sometimes fall on deaf ears when we say just comply and it'll all work out, because that's not their experience or the experience of their member of their family. So I put it on the police. In my opinion, I'm a civilian. Okay, I don't know every single tactical thing that's supposed to happen during a vehicle stop. I don't know that. It's the police officer's job to know that and how to handle that and to give clear instructions to the point and reassure the driver, no, I'm not going to shoot you because I'm nervous about you. So we've come to the point in our society where there's a company that produces a little plastic bag called the I'm Not Reaching bag. And in that bag, you put your license and your other identifying, and you hang it off the in your car. You hang it off of the vent, and right by the window. And you roll down the window, and you say to the officer with your hands on the wheel, "I'm not reaching. All of my ID is in the plastic bag. Can you see the bag?" That's where we've come in this culture, and
it's sad.
That's sad. That is really, really sad. And I put the onus on the police as much as I would put it on the civilians as well.
I totally agree with you, but I also think that there are some things within the community itself that they can come together. The problem we're having today is that the community doesn't trust the police,
right?
And the police are, and there's
don't trust the community. Yeah,
no, they don't. There's an old saying. And it's a horrible saying. And I tell officers, you cannot go into every interaction with this. And that is, I'd rather be tried by 12 of my peers in a court of law than carried by 6 of my friends in a funeral. And they've gotten this mentality that every encounter is that way. When you take a step back, and you look at, I had to look at lots of use of force reports. I had to make recommendations. And when you take a step back and when things start going south, it's because it started out wrong. The officer's tactics were wrong, or maybe the conversation between the community member was wrong. But I always tell police officers this: you're trained. If they could say that, they could call you all kinds of names. That's fine.
Yeah.
You're trained that might happen. Everybody's not happy to see you. They're just not. You're not their hero, right? And I think sometimes police think that they should always be heroes without any responsibility, or no one calling into question their tactics or what have you. And that's not the world we live in, because you get your authority from the community.
Yeah.
A silent hero.
You do. And you know what? A hero is someone that runs into something they're not getting paid for. It's bad. We always tell the officers, the first question we ask is, do you realize that in this job you could lose your life? Have you talked to your family about that?
Right.
Do you realize that you may have to take someone's life? And that's sad. That's awful. I had one of my best friend lose his life horrifically in the line of duty. But when you look at it from the standpoint of the police officer is the trained party. And I agree with you 100%, Greg. The police officer is the trained party. And when you go out in the hospitality, and I know we may have went a little bit left, and yes, I am familiar with Camden, and you really have to look at what it really was. It wasn't defunding the police. It was reforming the police. That's another issue. And reallocation of funds. And the eight can't wait. Most law enforcement agencies already have those policies. They just don't enforce them. One of the biggest things that's come out of here is the 21st century policing by President Obama's task force. Everything we're talking about today was in that book, but somebody decided to make it a doorstop and not look at it.
Before, can you explain really quickly what 8 Can't Wait is? Because I know that was a question that was asked. And I'd love for you to just explain what that is.
Yeah. So 8 Can't Wait, and I was I pulled it up here because it was one of the things that I was looking at. So 8 Can't Wait is a movement. It's a reform movement. So it says that, ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require de-escalation, require warning before shooting. You can't always do that, unfortunately. Because remember, when an officer is engaging in especially using a firearm, there's a half-second delay in their brain. Remember that. It's not like on television. It is not. There is research behind it. There's a half-second brain between the time the officer sees the threat and responds to the threat. So if you have that officer in all cases say, don't shoot, that's now a second and a half. And that officer is probably, because they're involved in a deadly force situation,
they lose their life.
They're going to lose their life. Requires exhaust all alternatives before shooting. Yes, that officers are trained to do that. That's the last resort. Shooting is not the first resort, and you've seen police officers who have lost their jobs and gone to jail because they used it as a first resort. A duty to intervene. That is trained. That is the first thing. There's two things that I tell police officers, and one is personal to the police organization, and it has to do with the uniform and what that uniform attracts. But the second thing that I teach them is that you do not lie for your partner. You do not let your partner step in a hole that you see is coming. If any one of those three other officers had pushed Chauvin off of Mr. Floyd, one of them did say, hey,
let's roll him over. Yeah.
Roll him over. Yeah. And Chauvin said no, and they deferred to the supervisor in the field. See how it goes back to supervision? Supervision in policing is finite. Someone is going to fill that supervision. Someone's going to always fill it. So the duty to intervene is already there. We just don't do that reminder to our police officers. Ban shooting at looted vehicles. Most police organizations already have banned that because you can move out of the way of a moving vehicle. You don't have to stand there. It's not television. And then require use of force continuum. We used to have that. There used to be this continuum of force.
That's
and
the way it
what
was in the NYPD. We
That's
used to
the way
have
it
that.
was.
Yes.
And with the Supreme, and then we can go into this, I won't, but there was some Supreme Court decisions that took that away.
Right.
That you don't have to have the continuum of force, because it's like 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, trying to decide what you need to do in each step. It would be like if you had to, it would almost be like if you had to get out of bed in the morning and you had to think about everything that you did to get out of bed. And so that's why police officers are trained in this. It's the training that needs to change.
Yeah.
The training needs to be more tactical training. It needs to be more scenario-based training.
Yeah.
It needs to be questions. We have an old saying, and I tell this to anyone that works in the public space. Think about everything that could happen to you in your public space going to work. And then think about your family going home. But what would I do? What happens if I'm confronted with a disgruntled customer? What if I'm just come across a violent customer? And then the last thing, require comprehensive reporting. I am 1,000% supporter of a nationwide database.
Yep.
We don't have a national police because of our states and the way we are our Constitution is set up and the way that we are a democratic republic, right? So that's what, and we know what, we don't want one entity controlling all of our police. We want to control it at the community level. But there's one thing I believe in, and that is there should be a nationwide database on police officers that have been terminated from their employment. This is what people don't understand, and I think we'll leave it with, I know we're running out of time, but this is so important. Police officers are certified by their state. So so you can't be a police officer until you've had training. And then the police department hires you. After that police department hire you, then you're certified as a police officer. When you are terminated or you separate from your police agency, you no longer technically have a license to be a police officer. You have to go to another organization, and then you have to have that license under them. Tamir Rice, the police officer, and that was the young man who was playing in the park with the play gun. Yeah. And people were saying, they thought he was older. And that's unfortunately a problem with young Black children. They're deemed to be older than they are. And the police officer immediately runs up and shoots the kid because he has what appears to be a gun. He had been terminated from his prior employment with another police agency because he had been found to be mentally unstable and not a right fit for policing, not just for their organization, but they had said this guy shouldn't be in policing, and then he's hired by another organization. There needs to be a nationwide database that says if you're terminated as a police officer for cause, that other law enforcement agencies need to know that, because that's a liability. You have now picked up somebody else's liability, and because you had bias, and most of the time this happens with white police officers, and that's just the facts, that a white police officer can be engaged in excessive force, misconduct, and will move to another police agency. There was just a big uproar about Broward County Sheriff's Office. Yeah. Now we know that where the Parkland shooting occurred, we know that there, a lot of situations of Howard and Broward County. Their union put up to the 4 officers in Minneapolis, oh, we'll hire you, come on down here.
Yep. Yep.
That's a problem.
We need national, in addition to a national database, I believe we need national standards, policing standards. They don't have to be egregious. They don't have to be down to the nitty gritty, but there should be generally accepted standards that every police department needs to be held accountable for, no matter how small or how big.
I agree. And in particular, and I agree with that specifically, because remember, when a law enforcement officer encounters you, And for the United States, and I'm sure it is for the rest of the world, when the law enforcement officer encounters you, you're now engaging in a constitutionally protective encounter. Every time you come in contact with a law enforcement officer, the Fourth Amendment in our Constitution applies, and that's to be free. That's to be free and have a movement in your person and property. So when they stop you, you're now engaging in a constitutionally protected activity. And so we do need that national standard. This is the minimum that you need. And of course, it's adjusted for if you're working transit or if you're working in different certain communities, but very little leeway in that. And I agree with you on that, Greg.
Okay, so our last question for the group is, what can we as citizens do to help improve the situation?
Well, for me, I feel these protests are important. Martin Luther King said protests are the voice of the unheard. And these protests are making, you'll notice how big these protests have become, and they're everywhere. And
they're globally.
And they're global. And the people who are participating are enormously diverse. I'm 60 years old. I've never seen this in my lifetime. And I would argue that most of us have never seen such a diverse protest. These protests are making a difference. Yes, that's
something global at this level.
It is. Yeah. That's one thing a citizen can do. And what's interesting is I was at a protest last week, and the speakers said, every one of them said, vote, interact with your local community, hammer on the mayor's door over and over again, go to the police chief, make your concerns known, get involved in community groups that are having conversations about this. So there's a lot of things that we as citizens can do. The one thing I say we shouldn't be doing is getting involved in vandalism and property damage and burning down buildings and attacking other people. That is counterproductive. And what it does, it actually causes some people who have hard hearts to lump us with our legitimate concerns in with criminal behavior. And that's just wrong. So yes, there's a lot we can do. And I think we should more than ever before.
And I'm going to leave you with just a couple of things. A is become a police officer. Yeah. It is really hard to clean a house when you're outside. Yeah. And it's a great career. I know it's difficult right now.
Not for everyone.
It's not. In the article I wrote, it is not for everyone. But if you have that temperament and you really want to do something for your community, it's a great job. It has great benefits. It has great pensions. And if you really want to do something and you meet the qualifications, become a police officer.
What are some of the qualifications?
Well, you have to be physically fit, right? So you have to have that physically fit. You have to pass a psychological exam. You have to pass a background exam. I mean, and these kids, we know marijuana is becoming legal in a lot of states, but you can't, you can have a little bit of drug use now because they understand, especially with marijuana, but you can't go in and have your physical and have, use drugs after you're hired as a police officer. So you have to understand that. Those are some of the qualifications, and be physically fit. I mean, academies, depending on where you go, are anywhere between 4 months and 8 months, right? And they're probably going to get longer. And I think they need to be a year. Minimum. After the Rodney King incident, I was on and that was, for those of you that may not be aware of that, that was in 1991 when a motorist, Rodney King, was seen on the first video of its kind, like we're seeing now, being beaten by 4 police officers. My husband worked for the Los Angeles Police Department at that time, where I worked for the Los Angeles World Airports, and he actually worked with 2 of those officers that were involved in that. And we saw after Rodney King, we created in the state of California what was called an Ethnic Relations Committee. And we also created a 16-hour module on cultural diversity for police officers. But what happens over time is that there is such pressure to get police officers in the street because they're retiring faster than we can hire them, that they cut the academy, and they rely on the local organization, the local community, to provide this type of training. Mm-hmm. And so that's it. And then secondly is get on a police commission. Get on a police commission.
Citizens Review Board.
Exactly. Go a civilian, and I am 100%. I was a union president for 20 years.
Woo-hoo.
So I am speaking from the union stand of view. I welcome a civilian review board. I welcome it. Come in and play in my house. I'm going to bring you into my simulator. I'm going to have you do shoot, don't shoot. I'm going to run you through scenarios. Become involved. And if you can't get on the commission, go volunteer at your police department. Go volunteer a couple of hours a week. And you can really see and understand and interact. We have to get police officers out of the cars and back on the streets.
Yep.
But what that's going to take, not defunding, but reallocating what they do so they have more time to do the things they need to do and not what's just been dropped in their lap.
Right.
Is there an age on how old you can be when you apply?
It depends. So some states 18, most states 20 and a half. So you could be 20 years and 6 months. But I can tell you, for my career, for my husband's career, for people that I've dealt with, it is a phenomenal career. Does it need reform? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there an age that you're too old to apply?
Well, for federal jobs, it's usually 35. But for law enforcement, most don't have an age limit. One of my best officers went through the Los Angeles Police Academy at 51. Wow. And he came out as the #1 cadet in physical and was one of our best officers ever.
He lived a life. He had experience.
Well, also, he was a lieutenant colonel as well. He wasn't going to let those officers, but he really taught those police officers. So we don't want just the young. If you are 35, 40, come on, because you have history. Yeah. You have the ability to guide these young police officers. But the #1 thing is demand that you have more supervision in the field. Police agencies have become overly heavy in the administrative part. There are more supervisors in what we call the building. That means sitting behind a computer and a desk than there are sometimes out in the field. And so that's another reallocation of resources. Some of this can be done by civilians. Some of the reports, some of all these things that we have police officers doing now and supervisors can actually be done by civilians and putting more supervisors in the field. Right now, sometimes supervisors may be supervising 12 to 20 officers, one supervisor. We know the optimum for policing is 5 to 7, right? That's the maximum. That is a maximum. And for me, I think it should be 3 cars at most. That's 6 officers should be the max.
If you don't want to join the police department, there are local organizations here in San Diego. We have an organization for folks who have psychology degrees and experience, who are called, who partner with the police. And if there's an incident, they'll call this organization and people will come out from that organization. They're volunteers and they use their training to help de-escalate and help work with that person, rather than the cops all standing around trying to figure this all out. They have an expert come in and handle it. So you could be part of those organizations too. You don't have to become a cop.
Right. And you're absolutely right. And leaving you with this, and we talked about it in the 8 Can't Wait, the duty to intervene.
Yeah.
I can't stress that more. I can't, and guess what? That's for your hospitality personnel as well, right? Mm-hmm. That when you see one of your employees is really having an issue with one of your guests,
step in.
What do? You take that guest away.
Yep.
You redirect it.
Redirect it.
Yep. Exactly. Mm-hmm. You say, well, sir, ma'am, can I help you? We train police officers. You know that, first of all, most police officers have a partner they work with. They know when that police officer's coming in, they may have, hey, police officers are human too. They may have had an argument with their spouse, their significant other. Yep. They may have had a kid that mouthed off to them. They are not at their best today. Mm-hmm. And your partner says, hey man, hey lady, hey, I know it's tough. Let me be the contact officer today. You just be my backup.
And that's like with everything, with every job, with every position. We're all the same. We wake up the same.
Exactly. Yeah. You wake up putting your pants on the same way. And so that duty to intervene If you do nothing else, if there is nothing else changed right now, that is the number one thing. The duty to intervene. You don't lie for another officer. You don't sugarcoat it for another officer. And I have in my career physically taken a baton out of one of my officers' hands that was getting ready to put it around someone's throat.
Yeah.
You have to do that because in the moment, we've got the adrenaline going and there's a lot of psychology behind this. And so you have to intervene. You can't let your partner step into a hole that they're going to drag you into as well, and your department and the profession of policing.
And their families.
And their families. Everything that they are. Everything they thought they were.
In Atlanta, that situation could have been resolved. The first police officer who responded was basically saying, okay, you can sleep this off in your car.
Yeah.
But then the second officer decided, no, this was a violation. Let's do a field sobriety test. Oh, and we're going to arrest you now. So it didn't have to happen. I get very passionate about this. A lot of this doesn't have to happen. LaPonda's right. If we have more supervisors in the field, if we have a willingness to intervene with our colleagues, but there's this fear that we have. I'm not going to rat out a fellow cop. That's what they called it in New York. I don't know if it's the same in LA. It's called the rat squad. And, we're not going to rat out a fellow officer, no matter how bad they are.
Exactly. Because they can see themselves. They can see themselves being questioned. Yep. And I can tell you with drunk driving. So drunk driving and driving under the influence is the hardest decision that a police officer makes. Yep. That could be discretionary. And I'll tell you why, because so many people die from drunk driving. Right. And it's something that you absolutely positively as the driver can control. And there's Lyft, and there's Uber, and there's this, and there's no reason to do that.
He wanted to walk to his sister's house to sleep it off.
Exactly. And so that's the situation. Yeah. And and police officers, that's called judgment.
Yeah, discretion.
Like, you know what? You're close. I'm going to take you go and walk. Yeah. I'm going to take the car
I'll
keys.
take the keys.
I'm not taking car keys. But the problem is, and I'll tell you, they think down the road, he'll go home, get another car, go out and drive drunk. So that's a difficult thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's a difficult thing. We used to, years ago, we would take you into custody and let you sleep it off. Right. It was like, okay, we're going to go take you to the station and let you sleep it off. But so many people die. That's a hard one. This was and I'll tell you, for me, it's a hard one for me because at the end of the day, the person started fighting with the police, and that was wrong too. So now you got two. You got two issues that are coming together, and look at, we're in another mess. But I think you're going to also see a change in that. I think what you're going to start having is you're going to start, instead of arresting people for drunk driving, and especially if it's their first time, I think you're going to have people that are going to be called out to take them home.
Yeah. And I think what else we're going to have to do is we're going to have to bring you two back, because we have so much to say, and we've learned so much today, and this has been phenomenal. And we're going on almost 90 minutes. So we were going to definitely do this again. And we're definitely going to post this and a re-recording so more people, because it's so much information and it was so informative. So thank you so much from the bottom of the heart. This has been excellent.
Yeah, we really
for having us.
We really appreciate it. And I think it's also, you've left all of us empowered to be as citizens, to be able to take action and in a way that's thoughtful, and hopefully can create that impact.
But also an understanding of where the police are coming from. Right. And as human beings. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we just need more mankind.
Exactly. And more, more than training, you need to be reminded, and we need to take a step back, slow down a little bit. And, these scenarios should happen in roll calls and supervisors meeting the officers in the field. What would you do if? I think that, and in this time right now, we need it. We don't need death. I don't mean to say that, but like George Floyd's family said, he's making a difference. His life and his death is going to make the ultimate difference in how we police in America and how we see around the world how we treat Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color.
I'm very positive.
Thank you.
I'm positive.
I'm very positive. I think we're heading in the right direction finally. Finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
as
don't-
we say that, I'd also like to remember it's the 5-year anniversary of the Charleston church shooting, and I'd like to honor those people and remember them today.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you. This has
Thank
been
you.
great. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
So thank you for your time, and I thank Kim Marshall for introducing us a few weeks ago and for COVID aid to bring us together.
Absolutely.
And LaPonda, it's been a pleasure. Such a wealth of knowledge. And we
thank
talked
you.
earlier today, we need to do a webinar, an all-day event. So we will kind of brainstorm and see what we can come up with.
Let's do it.
Well, thank you. We're ready.
Thank you for the space today.
Thank you. Take care,
Thanks, everyone.
Take
All
care.
right.
you so
Take
much.
some time for yourself today.
Thank
All right.
you.
Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.